Madeline Jacobs is wonderful to give us time, and we deeply appreciate it. She's a chemist, we already heard that, and she even has an honorary Doctor of Science from George Washington University because she's loved here in Washington. She's been executive director, CEO of the American Chemical Society since 2004. Wow. And before that, she had a 21-year career in science writing, journalism, public affairs at NAID, and also at the National Bureau of Standards, Jack, not NIST, National Bureau of Standards. Jack insists on that. He calls it. Me too. So we'd like to hear from you on the challenges that women face in chemistry and other fields.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be in this room with so many astonishing women from so many different parts of the sciences and the social sciences. I feel really, just really very humbled by it. And it's I'm not going to tell a personal story today. I have a whole talk I do on that, and I give it to undergraduates and graduate students, and I'll be happy to send it to anybody who wants. It's called 10 Lessons, and the first lesson is never do anything just to please your mother. But that's another talk. Today, what I really want to do is talk about the challenges that are that continue to face women chemists in particular. And the problem with being near the end of a program like this, where so many people have done such fantastic talks, is something that my chair of the board once said about our board meetings. Everything's been said, but not everyone has said it. So some of the things that I'm going to say are going to sound repetitious, but I've also tried to really listen carefully, and perhaps I will reference some of the things that Saba so courageously talked about, that Carol talked about. This talk is a talk that I've been giving in, let me see, I guess I just hit enter. Right, there we go. It's a talk I've been giving in some form for almost 4 decades. It's kind of astonishing. Because although women have come a very long way, as we've heard in the past 24 hours, they still face many obstacles and hurdles in their career pathways. So I'll start with the introduction to a song. Some of those people who know me know I love popular music, this kind of popular music. And this is from Richard Rodgers and Lorenz Hart, and it's the introduction to the song, I Didn't Know What Time It Was. So that's the song you all know, I didn't know what time it was, then I met you. But this is the introduction, once I was young, yesterday perhaps, danced with Jim and Paul and kissed some other chaps. Once I was young, but never was naive. I thought I had a trick or two up my imaginary sleeve. And now I know I was naive. So what do I mean by this? When I was a naive young chemistry major in the mid-'60s, I never had a woman chemistry professor. I never had an assistant professor, an associate professor, someone in the laboratory, or even there weren't even women graduate students. But I knew this situation would change because about half of my class in chemistry majors were women. And they were going to go on to medical school and to graduate school. And so I believed that it was a pipeline issue. So you needed women to get their bachelor's, master's, and PhDs. You needed time to have them progress from their degrees into academic and industrial areas. And eventually, I now realize naively, I would see women populating the ranks of academia and industry in proportion to the percentage of the degrees that they received. So as a young reporter, I had this, as I said, you'll have to read the other story about how I got from being in chemistry and leaving graduate school to being a young reporter at Chemical and Engineering News in 1969. And I wrote my very first article about women chemists in the October 26, 1970 issue of CNEN. And the headline for that article was, Women Chemists Concerned Over Rights. And its subtitle was, As Professional Chemists, Women Fight Lower Salaries, Lack of Job Opportunities, and Fewer Advancements. This is 1969. So this is what it looked like in Chemical and Engineering News, and there's some very eminent people up in the corner. I did have a pointer. That's Helen Free, who later became the second woman president of the American Chemical Society. She's just been received this Medal of Science and Technology about 2 years ago at the age of about 85. She's now 88. She's still going strong. She's an amazing woman, was one of my heroines. And it went on. But the thing was that this is the paragraph that really struck me as I looked at that article again in putting together this talk many years ago. Indication of the growing concern among women chemists over equal rights was evident at the ACS meeting last month in Chicago. This is 1970. At the traditionally tepid women chemists luncheon, for example, questions of equal pay for equal work, advancement opportunities, child care centers, part-time positions, and even whether the Society's Garvin Medal discriminates against women because women are not considered for any other ACS awards except the Conant Awards were hotly debated. Now, except for the part about the tepid women's chemist lunch and the fact that we now do give, among our 65 national awards, women are eligible for all of them, surprise, surprise, I can almost imagine writing the same paragraph today. And one of the things I did want to say was that I made my fame in 1970 when the editor of the magazine actually wrote an editorial for the first time about an article that a woman on the staff wrote. And it's called A Man and a Woman, and those of you who are old enough to know, you remember You've Come a Long Way, Baby. And the whole thing was about how really this story really got a lot of attention, and I became the expert on the staff and wrote about it quite a bit. So let me just go back to the pipeline. I'm not going to show slides. You've seen, data, but I will just say that the pipeline data are there, and everybody knows this. I mean, if you look at any of the statistics, the PhD level, the percentage of PhDs being awarded to women has gone from approximately 14% of all degrees in 1971 to more than 50% today. And this is also true in graduate students for sciences. Percentage of women graduate students rose from 36% in 81 to more than 57% today. And in chemistry in particular, in 1970, which was a few years after I graduated, 15% of the bachelor's degrees went to women. Today, it is well over 50%, and women receive in chemistry about 36% of the total number of PhDs. So these data would reinforce the feeling that the pipeline is very robust. And so, and that's important because I think that there are still a few people out there who think it's a pipeline issue. I cannot believe that at a recent town hall for candidates for the American Chemical Society, there were 4 nominees. They were going to get winnowed down to 2. But one of the perky women in the audience asked a question about women scientists, and the answer he gave had everyone rolling their eyes. I mean, it was a pipeline issue. There weren't enough women out there. And he didn't make it to even the final 2, because about 60% of the people who vote for the final slate are women. So, but this pipeline issue, of course, is very flawed. Presumably women will enter the pipeline if they have talent, skills, work hard, persevere. They will have opportunities to advance like their male colleagues. But as many social science researchers in the field have pointed out, the pipeline metaphor does not take into account the possibility that women exit the pipeline into a quote-unquote pond that is anything but neutral. And it seems that women tend to exit the pipeline into an entirely different tributary than men, a tributary that is filled with rough currents and unpredictable eddies, some of which we've heard. But even if you assume that pipeline is valid, time has to pass. So in the academic world, 5-6 years to get a BS, PhD. Then you have a postdoc, 7 years to get tenure. If you use 1990 as a starting point, when nearly 25% of the chemistry PhDs went to women, it would be around 2003 when women would show up on faculties as full professors. So I thought to myself, what became of these graduates? I returned to Chemical and Engineering News in 1993 as the managing editor, and it was really interesting to me because I thought to myself, very little had changed. When I came back in 93, and I left in 72, 21 years had gone by, it seemed to me, as I looked at the data, that not much had changed. So as I decided to really start highlighting women in the magazine and making sure that women chemists were reported on. That was something I found woefully lacking. And then in 2001, I started something called the Academic Scorecard. And I started collecting data from the top 50 universities by chemistry, by NSF chemistry funding, and asked them, how many women do you have on your faculty? And so the first time that I did this, we published a lot of zeros. And now CNN does this every year. There were a lot of people who didn't even answer the survey. So we took it from the Directory of Graduate Research, which is usually about 2 years behind. And of course, they were terribly embarrassed and we were wrong. And thereafter, every one of these universities answers the survey. But I think what this slide shows is that in this decade, there hasn't really been a lot of progress. I think that it is these just aren't, really very impressive statistics from my viewpoint in terms of progress. Especially since, we have over 35% of the women getting PhDs, and that's gone, actually that percentage has been in existence for more than a decade. We still only have full professors at the top 50, 13%. So yesterday we were very fortunate to hear from Eileen Pollack, who wrote that fantastic article in the New York Times, and it strongly reinforced this persistent problem that we see. And also that her article, and I was always impressed by the Nancy Hopkins work in MIT in 1999. And I'm not going to take up a lot of time, but remember what that study found. It found that the percentage of faculty in the School of Science was 8%, and that in 1999, that percentage had remained unchanged for 20 years. And at the time of the study, the mathematics department did not have a single tenured woman faculty. So there were 22 women and 252 men. And the reason that study was extraordinary, and my goodness, Chuck Vest deserves huge credit, because it acknowledged publicly that women professors suffer from pervasive, if unintentional, discrimination in areas ranging from hiring, awards, promotions, and inclusion on important committees to the allocation of valuable resources like laboratory space and research money. And this problem is not unique to the sciences. There have been studies in the New England Journal of Medicine that this is also true in medical school. And one of the sociology professors at Georgia Institute of Technology, Mary Frank Fox, points out that when you look at these data and you look at the trajectory of women over time, there is definitely something wrong here. And academic women survive the barriers of selection, both self-selection into science and selection by institutions. They move through the educational pipeline. They've earned credentials for their professional work, but it doesn't translate into changing these statistics here. So this is a very, very frustrating and depressing fact. And Donna Nelson, who is actually at the University of Oklahoma, a very distinguished woman chemist, who also has the distinction of being the advisor on, the science advisor on, I can't remember if it was Breaking Bad or CSI, but she's very connected to Hollywood in trying to get the science right on those programs. She has studied this for many, many disciplines. And this website here that I'm sending you to is showing how even though the percentages of women have gone up in almost every field, including engineering, she does it for science and engineering, that only in a few disciplines are women overrepresented on the faculty compared to the percentage of PhDs. Chemistry is not one of them. We are underrepresented. But there are a couple of disciplines, physics, I believe, is one of them, where the women on faculties of the top 50 is overrepresented compared to the percentage getting PhDs. So this is a persistent problem, and chemistry is really very poor in this regard. So I'm going to now move on to another big employer for chemists, and that is the chemical industry. And so I wanted to point out that, in the industrial world, a PhD is not is not always necessary to be successful. But nonetheless, if you really want to do an apples to oranges comparison, because that's all it can be, a typical career path from entry to senior executive could take 20 to 25 years from the time the person got a bachelor's degree. So if you use 1980 as a starting point and you kind of flash forward, you should see the impact of women in the industrial world, especially in chemistry, around the beginning of 2000. And, kind of what has happened. So I was at Chemical and Engineering News. This time I'm now the editor-in-chief. I really made sure that women were prominently featured in all the articles. They were, not only their work was reported on, their pictures were there. They were, chosen to comment on other people's work. But there were no data available about women in the chemical industry. And I knew there was a problem because every springtime, my desk would get flooded as the editor-in-chief with annual reports from all the chemical companies. There are hundreds of chemical companies. And as I would thumb through those, I would be struck by the photograph of the management board. And it was always like looking at a football team. I mean, it was like all men. And so I thought, well, what are the data? So I started the same chart for industry, and here are the data. This was the latest. This was in August 26, 2013, of Chemical and Engineering News. And when we started this study in 2001, we actually printed. We had pages of zeros. There was no woman CEO or chief operating officer or chief financial officer. They only fared slightly better on the boards of directors. And anyhow, flash forward to the current date. These statistics have barely moved. I mean, in 2003, no company had a woman CEO. Okay, 2013, we have one. There's still 10 companies and here we use the top 42, and these companies do change a little bit because of mergers and acquisitions, but 10 companies had no women on their boards, 13 had no top women executives, and of 45 women executives, only 7 ran businesses. Why is that important? Because in the chemical industry and in the pharmaceutical industry, if you are a woman, I don't care how smart you are, if you have not run a business with profit and loss responsibility, you will never, ever be the chief executive officer, the chief operating officer. You will never get there. And that has been well documented. And organizations like Catalyst point this out all the time. And there have been many, many studies. And there are reasons why women don't get those opportunities. So we'll talk a little bit about the explanations. So something is wrong with this picture. And the explanations that are given for the lack of women in the top at various places and the salary gap, and that was what first got me started in this whole field, was looking at the ACS data on salaries. And in 1969, I was so shocked. How could there be differences in the starting salaries of a BS chemist for men and women? And, there are still salary gaps, not so much at the starting point, but they are still persistent after experience. And when you look at salaries, the explanations that are given is, well, the jobs aren't equivalent. Women go into different types of jobs. They're teachers, they're not at universities, they're at 4-year colleges, they're at community colleges. But that to me raises the question, well, if this is true, why do they choose those careers? And, you have to ask, equal pay for equal work, same degree and experience level don't necessarily mean the jobs are equivalent. What does that mean? Women are also less likely to have full-time jobs than men. Why is that? Apart from salary gaps, you look at what is happening to the employment of women in academia in chemistry. And CNEN, under my tenure and even under Rudy Baum's tenure, we did a lot of stories about women in academia. And in one of those stories, one of the women said, women in academia are voting with their feet. They're trying to avoid some of the problems they see in graduate school, the long hours, the shrinking resources, the lack of time with families, that many faculty experience. And they're opting out of positions at PhD granting institutions. They're accepting positions and often are quite happy at four-year colleges and in industry. Nothing is wrong with any of these career choices. Nothing is wrong at all. Some male chemists also go this route. But one of the reasons that they have chosen, and this has been documented, is the lack of mentoring. We've talked about this a lot, and collegiality, especially at the male-dominated chemistry faculties by male faculty members. That this is seen, the lack of mentoring and collegiality are seen by women chemists as the key factors in failing to retain women in academia and move them up into tenured positions. In industry, the excuse that's given for the lack of women is that they don't get the experience running businesses. They're often not given that opportunity. Assumptions are made by managers, and this has been documented also in studies that have been sponsored by NSF and the Sloan Foundation, that women managers are even worse at making the assumption that so-and-so won't want to take that job in Asia because she has children and she'll never relocate. They don't even get offered the jobs. And this has been studied from an academic viewpoint in which surveys have been done extensively. So there's, again, these perceptions that we have. Catalyst says women aren't claiming the corner office because they're not getting the experience in the business of business. That is the key that will unlock the doors for women throughout corporate America. Now, all of these organizations have talked about the non-trivial barriers, and I'm going to do it. The non-trivial, I have 10 minutes, non-trivial barriers. There are non-trivial barriers. We've talked about these barriers. There are attitudes toward women, the exclusion of women from informal networks, the informal networks that build trust and visibility that can lead to line management positions in industry. And the statement has been made that men need to see women as members of the team who can contribute to reaching the company's goal, but women are equally bad in this regard. They have to see women as part of the team. 20 years ago, Gerhard Sonert and Gerald Holton, both at Harvard, one was a sociologist, one was a physicist, wrote an article about the web of hidden processes that significantly thwart the careers of many women. I love that phrase, the web of hidden processes. These are the processes of marginalization we've heard about today. Virginia Valiant has written about this, a big heroine of mine at Hunter College, in her book, Why So Slow? The Advancement of Women, and in many articles. And she talks about how these become cumulative. We've heard about that. But I want to give you one specific example that she talked about. A newly hired woman PhD on a chemistry faculty goes to her department chair and says, I would like to teach the general chemistry course. And the chair says to her, this really actually did happen in 1990, but I'm sure it's happening today too. And the chair says, no, that course has never been taught by a woman. My students, they would be very confused by this. This was 1990. Today, you wouldn't see it quite as much. So instead, a young male faculty member hired at the same time gets that course. She's immediately disadvantaged because now she's assigned to a laboratory course that eat up a lot of time. She doesn't have as much time as he does to write the proposals to get her career started. Very small thing, but over the course of time, it's these small little things that add up that disadvantage a woman. So what can we say about the pipeline? The pipeline is robust. The pipeline is leaky. It doesn't enter into a neutral pond. And, we talk about what can we do, and we're going to have those discussions. So I have like lists and lists of things. There's a couple books that I really love, The Door and the Dream. You all get, I guess, a copy of this presentation. Elga Wasserman interviewed women in the 1990s from different cohorts. These women had been elected to the Academies of Science, Engineering, and the Institute of Medicine. And she looked at them from their birth cohort, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s. Many of these women have subsequently passed away, but she really took Elga was herself educated as a chemist in the laboratory of R.B. Woodward, who hated women, Harvard, again, let's just get back to Harvard, and she then became an attorney, and she married a very eminent chemist, Harry Wasserman. But Elga really documented some very key things about what makes women successful. So I like that book. This is also another great book. It's a little bit old, but I think it is really nifty. And then, of course, this article we've all read, and I just loved it when it came out. I thought it was fantastic. So we obviously need to continue to track and analyze data and ensure that young women have adequate information for making career choices and providing the keys to success. But let me just go on to what we have to do first. We have to fix the XY chromosome year 2000 problem. And I told Eileen that I told her the punchline of this story. What do I really mean by this? Well, those of you who remember that there was going to be a horrible problem in the year 2000 because of the computer code. And although that problem actually never really materialized, it was because there were a lot of software fixes that were going to, that actually were written to make sure that we didn't have that problem, because when they wrote code, they left out certain digits, and they weren't really prepared for the fact that we'd be still having computers in the year 2000. And, to me, it's kind of about, could we have a software fix for what has actually been, please forgive me, I know I'm going to sound like Larry Summers, but what has been a long evolutionary basis. Women and men are different. We have two X chromosomes, and men have an XY chromosome. We are clearly different. I like to say men are from Mars and women are from Venus. I mean, we do have differences. And frankly, I think we have advantages because we have these two X chromosomes. And specifically, let me just say that I have often wondered what's on the Y chromosome besides the sex determinant. And Nicholas Wade kind of solved that problem for me when he wrote in the New York Times that the Y chromosome is in a lot of trouble because it has been shedding genetic material for many, many millennia. So I have come to conclude that there is a gene for self-confidence on the male chromosome, and that explains a lot of our issues. But there's a list of things to do. So find a mentor, be a member. We've all talked about this. This is what I call my David Letterman top 10. This comes from having talked to many people, read lots of articles, gotten comments from readers, and this visualizing yourself with power and using gets back to the self-confidence, the things that we talked about yesterday, that Eileen talked about at lunch, about how women who are really brilliant at the best universities doing great things still don't think of themselves as smart enough, pretty enough, whatever. It's a crazy, crazy thing. Be open to change. This is really based on a book called Membership in the Club, The Coming Age of Executive Women, and Dawn Marie Driscoll and Carol Greenberg describe the 5 R's, the qualities that are expected of successful people in business: respect, responsibility, resourcefulness, revenue development, which you could substitute for proposal writing, risk-taking. If you embrace these 5 R's, you can be part of the culture of success. I like to tell young women, you construct your own personal agenda. No one will do it for you. And you have to ask yourself, where do you want to be? You have to pledge to work for change. You have to, information is power. You have to share it, acquire it. This number 7, it sounds a lot like being a mentor, finding a mentor. Number 8 is getting a life. This is about the work-life balance. I tell people, when you see a woman like Carol, who does it all, I'm sure Carol doesn't think of herself as superwoman, but she is probably super organized, and that's what you have to do. You do have to learn when to say no, and what is not really in the top of your priorities. So it is learning how to basically set your own agenda and know what your priorities are, and when other people dump their priorities, like the grants that have to go in and you have 13 seconds to approve it, you just say, you know what, you should have given that to me 2 weeks ago. Seeking collaborations. I mean, Saba's story is heartbreaking because there are so many people who could have helped you and who now will help you now that we know your story. But there are so many people who want to help. There's so many professional societies. There are people like us. But I also think that women are very hard on themselves. They set high standards for themselves. They have an expectation that they will be superwoman. One person wrote me that said, you are the only one who knows you didn't publish as many papers this year as you had planned, or that you didn't make every field trip of your son's first grade class, and that you occasionally pick up a pizza for dinner. Everyone around you is looking at you in awe. And you are providing an excellent example for your children, your daughters, and your sons that women can be successful and happy, balancing professional and personal lives, even if we're not very good at giving ourselves credit for doing so. This was a reader to CNEM. My last thing is really carpe diem, I think, seize every day. Now, I'm going to end by just telling you a fable that comes to me courtesy of Harvard University's Dudley Hirschbach, who is a great advocate for women and a great mentor for women. And this tale is a little bit of a shaggy dog story. It sounds like it to me. It appeared in the autobiography of a very distinguished physicist, Emilio Segre. He said he got it from a Quaker lady in Philadelphia, and for the version I will tell you here, Gertrude Elion, the late Gertrude Elion, a Nobel laureate, provided a very perceptive conclusion. And it goes like this. There were two young frogs frolicking in a garden, a rainy garden, when they spied a curious gleaming object, and they jumped right in, and they found themselves in a pail of milk. Now, in the beginning, it was very novel, and they were having a great time splashing around. It was much different than it being in their pond. And for a while, they really had fun. But then they got tired, and they tried to find a perch to jump on and get out. And there wasn't any, because they were in a pail of milk. They weren't in a pond. So they became panicky, and they tried over and over again to jump out of the pail. And one of the frogs finally gave up, was just too tired, couldn't do any more, and drowned. The other frog was no less terrified, but was much more stubborn and continued jumping. Kept jumping over and over. The frog leapt up and down, and up and down. And finally, that second frog was also exhausted and was resigned to sinking into the milk, when suddenly, beneath the feet, there was a little perch. And what had that frog done? That frog had actually churned a pat of butter. And so, using that as a launching pad, managed to get onto that pat of butter and jump out of the pail of milk. And Gertrude Elion said, that second frog must have been a woman. Now, I'm not suggesting that we go into our kitchens and start churning butter, but, we all need that launching pad to help us move ahead and be a springboard. And I think energy and perseverance do pay off, and so we do need to work together and find ways to make that happen. Finally, what can I say? I started this in 1969. I've been writing about and being involved in gender equity issues as well as diversity and inclusion for more than 4 decades. A lot has changed, a lot has gotten better, but when we hear the kinds of stories that we've heard, there's so much more that we need to do, and we need to make sure that we don't forget that there are huge challenges ahead. So I have rewritten this verse now. Once I was young, 20 years or so, rather well preserved, the wrinkles didn't show. Now I am old, although Aubrey's going to fix that. But certainly not naive. I think I have a trick or two up my imaginary sleeve, and oh yes, I know I'm not naive. So I'm looking forward to hearing this afternoon how we're all going to try to continue to move this forward, and I guess I could answer 1 or 2 questions. Thank you. The mic maybe isn't on.
When I started the Rosalind Franklin Society, which is how many years ago now, Carla? 5 years ago, I realized that starting a society that was going to help mentor women and have more advancement potential for them and more recognition, I should first take a look at the journals that I had and see how many women were editors-in-chiefs of those journals, and I was slightly appalled. And then I looked to see how many women were on the editorial boards of the journals that we had, and I was equally, if not more, appalled. And we've done a lot to correct that. But I will say that with some exceptions, and Carol is certainly a terrific exception, we generally find that men do a better job editing a journal, being the editor-in-chief. They like the power that is associated with being an editor-in-chief. They recognize that this is a powerful position. They like it very much, and they take the job with more determination. So I just wanted to make that comment. I also want to read an email to you that just came in this morning. Hi, everyone at RFS. Sorry for not showing up this morning. I was very much looking forward to the talks today, but woke up with the news that the Senate put my nomination on the docket for today.
Yay.
So I've
Yay.
been following those developments. Hope to join you later, but might end up at the Senate building instead. It's so appropriate, after waiting for this day for 11 months, that it should happen when my RF friends are all here. Thanks so much for last night. It was a wonderful and unexpected gesture. And that's from Joe.
Joe, yay! All right, go Joe. I want to. If I could just say one thing about women editors. So ACS did, looked at all about 15 years ago. Looked at all its journals and its editorial boards and its advisory boards, and has made a concerted effort to increase the number of women editors. And we have been very successful in that. A lot of our new editors are women. They're incredible women. We've increased the number of senior editors and associate editors, as well as women on the advisory boards, and we're global. We only have 44 journals, but they're very interdisciplinary. And so I'm not sure. I do agree with you, men love the power, but it's up to the scientific and professional societies to make sure that your search committees, I appoint the search committees, and when they come into me and I don't see a significant number of women on the search committee, I send it back to the publications division and I said, I'm sorry, I only see one woman on this search committee of 7. And, it doesn't go out like that. So, now they have started also, sometimes first names are a little confusing. So I've said that I would like to see photographs because I also want to see if there's ethnic diversity. So you can't accept the status quo. Now in the last 10 years, I've actually been in a position to help change the status quo, and that's been a very exciting thing. I am the first woman executive director at the American Chemical Society in 138 years or something like that. There have been, I'm the 9th one. Same thing with CNN. I was the first woman to be editor-in-chief there. We can go on and on about how, if you are the first, there are high expectations. When Anna Harrison became the first woman president from Mount Holyoke of the American Chemical Society, I had the honor of meeting her as a young reporter, and it was the thrill of my life. Subsequently, we have a lot of women who are president of ACS. So we made a lot of progress, but there's still, in the awards area, we still have a long way to go. I know we're going to have a presentation on that.
There are other issues. When there are few women and you have to have women on committees, we get oversubscribed by those responsibilities. But the Women's Faculty Caucus at Harvard made sure that search committees always had women on them. And I've been told, and I hadn't appreciated this because I was in the trenches, that we changed the tone of the discussion and we moved it and have had tremendous impact, so that with the Faculty of Arts and Sciences growing by 25%, we increased the number of women, the percentage of women overall in arts and sciences. And we've had so many other impacts. And you have to just keep at it. And even if it means working hard and multitasking and all the other things.
No question about it. Maria Freire didn't mention it yesterday, but I know that when she was the executive director at the Lasker Foundation, I had talked to her about the fact that there were so few women, and yet she said the problem was there were so few nominations. Right. So few nominations, and there are members of the RFS Society on the board of the Lasker Foundation that are on the judges board. So are there any other comments or questions? I have some, but I'm going to save them for lunch, and we're going to break for lunch right now.